Well, good morning. This is Ed Reither with the Beezone, and today we have Gerald Sheinfeld, who I've known for many years, and he has written a book called At the Feet of the Spiritual Master: Stories of My Life with Avatar Adida Samraj. So, Gerald, also known as Jerry, is in California, and I am in Taos, and we have met up on 26th of September, and I hope you enjoy this interview. Hello, Jerry.
Hi, thank you for the opportunity to share some interesting things. I think I began to talk about, but did you want to ask me a question first?
How long was this book in the making?
Well, over the years, ever since the very beginning in 1972, when I felt something in Adida's company, how it affected me, I had to write about it. I put it in my diary. Mm-hmm. And then in time, over a few years, after that built over a few years, I would try to tell some of the stories about it to the devotees of Adida. And that happened many times through the years. And I said eventually, and I kept accumulating more and more information, more and more of these stories. And eventually I felt, I want to write a book about this. I can pass the word to more than just devotees about what happens in this company and what effect it has on an ordinary person. So I kept trying to write the book, and I never found the time. I had too many responsibilities. I was living on the sanctuary in Fiji for 20 years, and responsibilities didn't give me time. So anyway, I tried until finally I had to leave the island because I had a medical condition. And while dealing with the medical condition, I had a lot of free time. Mm-hmm. So I finally started writing the book. And I couldn't do it. So I started praying and asking Adida for help and guidance. And eventually I got the point that I couldn't just try to remember the stories and write from my mind, from my memory. Mm-hmm. I actually had to relive the stories. Right. Go back and write from the feeling as it was happening. Mm-hmm. In the feeling dimension, not the mind dimension. And when that started happening, I knew that the stories were going to carry his transmission and not my interesting story. So the whole process has been over 6 years. Wow. Now, it's had the C editors of Adidam have their influence into the book, and Bhagavan's Leelas, Adida's Leelas all throughout the book. And I'm just kind of passing the gifts, passing the prasad.
Well, when I go over the book, which has some really very fine endorsements from Andrew Harvey and other well-known people, and I can only think of 4 myself books written by devotees about Adida or their time with Adida. So this is one of the few books, considering he taught for 40 years or close to that, and so few books have been put in print from devotees. So this is in itself a remarkable feat.
Yeah. You know, what happened was I felt that this book cannot be about me because it's about him. I was there. But the secret was, I was there, but it's not me. So that's the communication.
And so for people who are not familiar with what you refer to as the divine reality, and a lot of people talk about God and feeling God and talking to Jesus or Moses or Muhammad or having some connection to the divine, could you talk a little bit, because the book is really thoroughly about the transmission of divine reality, of his state, if you will. Could you speak to a little bit about that sense of his transmission?
Well, the value of the book is it tells stories. And stories carry the quality of what happened in a very easy to receive way. Mm-hmm. So, for example, there was it's better to tell stories than it is to give a strong Dharma, to explain his teaching and explain how this looks and how this is. It's too demanding. It's better to just tell the story. So, for example, one story that depicts that to some degree was he liked to go on the island in Naitomba in Fiji, which is this hermitage sanctuary. He liked to go to a place called Banyan Bay, beautiful bay with tropical warm waters and foliage and flowers and warm breezes. And we put a cabana up for him and a lounge for him to lay down and relax. And he'd like to go there occasionally and just relax and enjoy the quietness and calm of that environment and take a little dip in the water. I was invited to go there and to attend him on one of those occasions, and by attending him, I was invited to stand by him and fan, to keep the bugs, because it's tropical, to keep the mosquitoes and bugs off of him and keep him cool by breathing through the fan. And he laid in his lounge, and I stood next to him and just fanned him with putting my attention on the service I was doing. And it seemed to be very simple, uneventful, just fanning. And after about a long period of time, he got up and went to the water, took a little dip, and one of the other devotees that was there said, "It's been 2 hours. You've been in samadhi." And I just felt, well, I know the term samadhi, but all I knew was I felt so simply happy to be there. I didn't have any sense of separation. I didn't have a sense that I was standing there, that I was doing anything. His presence, without any effort at all, his presence just took over my separative being and made me feel a natural state of love bliss, not an exaggerated state, but a natural state of free happiness. And the body was standing, the arm was moving. When bugs were coming, they were moving. I wasn't aware of doing any of it. It was just spontaneously happening. So his presence just took over the separative point of view, and it was a perfect union, a non-separate union. No, not two entities there, but one living being that his conscious state awakened in me without any effort.
Right.
So that's one of the transmissions. There's so many transmissions that happen where the body reacts to his transmission and has spiritual experiences. Right. But he always says, well, you're having a spiritual experience. Who is having the experience? No matter how blissful it is and how out of the body it is, who's having it? Right. The one that's having it is a separative point of view. It's a contraction on reality. In reality, there is no separation. It's an illusion, right? So that one that's having the separative experience must be understood and transcended. Then there is no separation, rather than enjoying the experience that is within the separation. And that's always the transmission of that non-separate state, always that.
And so that was the primary communication always from your book that really comes through all the while, is the transmission of his blessing and his state. But also you tell stories about lessons in there, and one particularly that I was working on because it related to something that was very, let's say, disruptive in Naropa Institute in 1975 called the Naropa Poetry Wars. In your story, which is similar to that, it's called the 70-Year Party. And that happened in December of 1973, where he asked everybody to take their clothes off.
First of all, this was during his submission teaching years. He basically was submitting to those that came to him and addressed us where we're at, rather than simply sitting and transmitting the divine condition without content, right?
Right.
So we were gathered. It was right before Christmas time. We were gathering in the lunchroom at one point, and he came in the La Brea ashram, and he started talking about the divine reality and also the limited point of view that we all address. And he said, "Well, look at the way you're dressed. Everything, the clothing is it's an expression of how you want to present yourself. It's a defense. It's a costume. Right. It's not you. So why do you wear these costumes? Why do you present yourself this way? Because you want to be accepted, you want to be liked, you want to be loved, right? But that means you don't feel you're accepted, you're liked, you're loved. There's something, you're doing it because of something, right? The way you comb your hair, the clothing, all the clothes you wear. So why don't you just, let's see what it feels like if you don't have to present yourself, but you just are yourself.
Right.
What would you do if you took your clothing off? We're going, well, I don't know if we want to do that. And they go, why not? What are you defending? Why do you want to put this front up? Why not just, what would it be like if you took your clothing off? So he brought us a consideration about that. And when we felt, that makes sense. Let's see what the difference would be if we took our clothing off. So it was more than just him saying, take your clothing off. You see? So we agreed to the consideration. And we started taking our clothing off, and it was awkward, and it was uncomfortable, and it was this and that, because there's so much self-protection and so much, all sorts of stuff that comes up when you start doing that. But gradually, we all took our clothing off, and we felt eventually, after we looked at each other and checked out each other's body parts and all that, and stopped all that, and kept turning our attention back to him, there was no big deal about it. He said, you're born naked. You just add stuff like clothing after you're born. That's your way of protecting yourself. So you're back to your natural state. Be happy with it. And he starts talking about the freedom of being happy as not the naked body, but being happy as the non-separate body,
right?
The divine, awakened body. Mm-hmm. So, and then he brought us to a whole consideration about what is it like to be that free. And then the long Leela, which took place in that whole time period, is in the book. It's really worth reading because it shows he wasn't having us do any investigation while we're naked. It wasn't about having sex. It wasn't about doing anything. It was about just being free.
Right.
Yeah? Without any defenses, without any protections put on the body. Right? And it wasn't about doing anything. I think some other teachers talked about, experiment with that. And we went into experimenting at all. It was about dancing and celebrating and loving. Yeah.
Right,
and,
right.
Yeah.
Well, when he points out the difference between telling stories and telling Leelas really have a resolution to them, and they have a lesson that's associated with whatever the play is. And so your book is one of the things that your book does do, is that you always point to a lesson. You always point to not just the play for the story, but you bring out the lesson or the consideration of what he's working with.
Yeah, see, in order to tell a story about me, it's going to be a lot of my input about it, me and my personality and what I did and all that. But to tell a Leela, it's about him. So if I can get out of the way, as I tried to do in writing the book, and just talk about, yes, I was there, but it's not about me, so it focuses the attention on him. So his transmission comes through the story. And he's working with me through his presence as a person, and also his transmission, his free state. And that's affecting me. So there's a lot of lessons learned in there, a lot of great self-understanding learned in there, a lot of profound sensitivity to a greater reality, sensitivity to divine reality, and what he calls reality itself.
Well, one of the stories that really points out what you might point to, another reality, is in the Leela that you're entitled My Father's Passing, which is about you, but it's also about your father and about real life circumstances and about the fact that you were through dreams. Well, maybe you might want to just speak a little bit about that particular part of it, because it does have something to do with you, your father, and also Arida.
Well, there's two things that happened about that I felt was so significant. I never told Arida that my parents had moved to Florida from Boston. I never told him that what they told me they'd like to do would be sit on the bench and at the beach and just watch the passing parade. That's my mother's words. He never mentioned that. There was no reason to have mentioned that at all to him. But when I found out my father died, and he brought me to his seat, he told me to tell him stories about my father, and talk about my love for my father, and talk about the happy times I lived with my father, and celebrate. And he said to me, "Your father needs to feel your love. He's in the death process right now. He needs to feel your love." And I would do all of that, and then it was so much. After I don't know, a couple hours or something like that, I went to the back of the room and I sat on the bench. I came and sat next to me. And rather than saying anything about I'm taking care of your parents, or I know your parents are passing and I have them in my attention, nothing about that. At one point, while sitting there quietly, he turned to me and he said, "Isn't it interesting sitting on this bench watching the passing parade?" Exact words of my mother.
Right.
So that told me he was totally involved in knowing them and helping them.
Right.
The next night, my father died that night. The next night, I was in the men's dormitory. In the middle of the night, I was awoken by my father's voice yelling, "Jerry." Adi had called me Gerald. Everybody in Adidown called me Gerald. As a child, I was called Jerry. And some of my closest friends from childhood called me Jerry. Right? So all of a sudden, somebody's calling me Jerry in my father's voice while I was sound asleep. It woke me up, and I felt it was clearly my father. The feeling in the room was absolutely my father. And so I spoke to him about, "Wow, amazing that you had come. You died, but isn't it okay? You see, the death process is a process. You're not in hell. You're in the process. And thank you for coming here. Allah has drawn you to come to here, to say goodbye. And I love you. And you're going to be fine. He's taking care of you. And you're a good man. And thank you for being my father." All these kinds of things. And he didn't respond. I could tell that I could feel the presence there. And then after a while, it was quiet. I could feel the presence left. And that was after he passed. And it was just another gift of the influence that Adida can have on his devotees. He always said, "I bless all my devotees, and I bless all of the intimate families of my devotees, even if they don't relate to me, even if their families don't relate to me. I still bless them through the vehicle of my devotees."
Right. Yeah. You also have because our identity in this culture is so, let's say, deep in our psyche, you have a Leela about a Jew in a Christian society, and your kind of part of your identity or personality that had a deeper part to it that you hadn't been quite aware of, the as you point out, your basic fear of being rejected. And many people are not even aware of some of the play that they have. And so this Leela points to the depth and some of the personal and even the psychological work that people have to do in the company of somebody as profound and magnified as Adida.
Well, one of the most significant things that happened in the earliest time with Adida was the release or the understanding, and then the release of aspects of the character, the personality that's contracted, that's defended, that's rejected, that's hurt, that's betrayed. And I was born in a Jewish community. A Jewish family rather, and happily, a misfit and did all the things that a child would do as growing up in a Jewish family. And then when I started getting into business, when I started getting in the relationship with friends, starting to get into a relationship with ladies, there was one lady I really liked, and she was Italian. So I decided I would tell her my name was Italian rather than Jewish. I used a French name. And I told her I was this Italian guy. I thought that would allow her to be more available to a relationship with me. When I got into business, I called myself Jerry Shine, S-H-I-N-E, rather than Gerald Sheinfeld, because to me it was a catchy little name, Jerry Shine, buy my product as a salesman. But it also was a way of something about the Jewish thing. It wasn't, there's still a prejudice. I could feel the prejudice happening.
Right.
So I didn't want to be exposed. I didn't get involved in the prejudice. And then I guess a few little things like that happened in my life. And at some point, I guess I told Adidas some of those things. And one day, he spoke to me and he said, first, the understanding was that when we're born, as his teaching has given, the first awareness we have when the eyes open and the feeling perception comes is that there is an I, a separate point of view, and there's everything else that's not I. Mm-hmm. That immediately opens the state of fear. Right. So the infant, even beginning, not even knowing that term, but the senses of feeling are already in the sense of fear. So there's always a mechanism of how to release that fear. Right? So somehow I didn't want to feel the prejudices, or I felt somehow even as I grew up as a kid, I took the garbage out from my home, my mother, and she always appreciated that. I felt loved by doing something. Mm-hmm. Somehow I felt this fear, this fundamental fear and the need to be loved. I had to do something to get it. And I kind of questioned if I was really getting love. The attitude that most people have is, you don't love me. You have a fight with somebody, an argument with somebody, or something, and it's, you don't love me. It's a fundamental mood. Freud and all those talked about it in the past. But so Adidas finally talked to me, and he said, you have this emotional state of feeling that you're not being accepted. Mm-hmm. You're not being loved. So you're always motivated to do things to be accepted and loved. It's kind of like you're a Jew in a Christian society, and so you're separate, right? And you always feel you have to do that. Right? And I felt the truth of that. But you see, when he speaks that way, he doesn't just give you words. He opens up feelings, and he made me feel what I felt behind being a Jew in a Christian society was not being accepted. And the feeling of not being accepted was obviously not a true condition. It was something else adding to my true state. It was revealing a depth of complete acceptance, of a complete non-separation, and feeling the separation on top of it. So he reveals the depth in his transmissions. That made me recognize that I do this, and I don't need to do that anymore because it's not true.
Right.
It's just something I added. It's something I believed.
And it's also something that he points out because of his non-separate condition that everybody has. He calls it self-contraction, but it also points to something you have in the book towards the end of it, in the May to September 216 section, where you talk about 6 gifts of Adida, or divine reality, and the first one is exactly what you're pointing to. Is the first gift is the ego I, is the illusion, that separation that you address, and that's the self-understanding that he always said was essential to anybody's beginning to receive actually the second gift.
Yeah.
So maybe if we could just talk a little bit about the gifts that Adida has not only given you, but given the world, right? Because that's basically your Leela, is of his world blessing nature.
Well, yes. The interesting thing about that last Leela that's in the book, the 6 gifts, divine gifts, was that they weren't a memory that I just thought back about. They weren't something that I read about. Something I feel. It was actually a transmission. In depth of meditation, there was a direct transmission. And when you get a direct transmission, it doesn't get to the point where you either accept it or not. It's like presented so clearly that it's absolutely, undeniably, obviously true.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And this whole attitude of the self-contraction that we are assuming we're a separative entity. There's nothing we can do as a self-contraction to get out of it, because anything we would do is still coming from the point of view of that self-contraction. You can't lift yourself by your own bootstraps. You can't move out of yourself, because whatever you do is still based on that one that's doing it. Right? So you need the transmission that attracts you to a free state. And that transmission comes from Adida of his non-separate state. It's a track that the heart recognizes this freedom, and it sees its limitations, so the self-understanding is automatically given in the recognition of his free state. So in the time at the retreat in Fiji, the 4-month retreat there, the first clarification he went through was about the self-contraction. Isn't it obvious that this is an illusion? I'm living. Everything about me confirms I'm separate. There's nothing that I can do that can't confirm I'm separate. But it's not true. My true state is not separate. So the separate has to be understood. And it's understood by turning to the non-separate condition. And where is that non-separate condition? It's in Adida's living presence. As his devotee has recognized it. So then the second thing he talked about is, well, what is the truth of reality? If separation is not it, non-separation is it. Well, what is non-separation? And he talks about, he transmitted how the non-separate state is consciousness itself. The condition of unqualified awareness, unlimited awareness is consciousness. Consciousness is the condition of reality. And that condition has no quality in it, except for the sense that it is a positive condition. It's a condition of love and bliss. It's equanimity, it's balance, it's peace. It's the perfect state. When I had experiences of love, bliss in his company, I thought I was looking for the highs that would get to the drugs experiences and hippie experiences, all that. It's not at all. Love, bliss is the natural state of existence. It's the ordinary state. But it's a perfect peace. It's the perfect purity. So go ahead.
Well, I was just pointing, and that's the foundation. But then you have the fourth gift, which is familiarity as an obstacle, meaning that there is the sadhana, the work to be done here, because you still have some scars or whatever you want to call them, these patterns of within the personality that still arise. And so,
absolutely.
And the fourth gift, maybe you could speak a little bit about the familiarity as an obstacle.
See, so first, the third gift he talked about, that his transmission is that transmission of consciousness, and then there's a much more expanded understanding of that in the third gift. But in the fourth gift, he said, what are the limitations to this recognition? To the recognition that that consciousness is reality, that he is a transmitter of that reality, is familiarity. In my case, because I've been with him from the beginning. Before the first ashram even opened, and I was in his company all the time. I was the head priest for 20 years and traveled with him and all sorts of stuff with him. So he was, to me, the greatest person I could ever want to know. My best friend, the person I loved, the person I called my guru, my heart master, my spiritual master, and on and on and on. But there was also a familiarity there. And the familiarity made me feel there is a me and there is a he. And that familiarity allowed him to say separate, rather than recognition that there is no separation between he and me. His true condition shows that there is no separation. Familiarity adds a separation into it. That had to be understood. And the way I understood it was most clearly by recognizing what he had said about who he is and consciousness and the self-contraction, all that coming together. How can you be familiar with conscious light? How can you be familiar with love bliss? It's not your state. You can't be familiar with it. So you turn to it and you submit to it, and it awakens you, it attracts you. And in that awakening, there's no familiarity. There's oneness. How can you be familiar with yourself?
Well, that seems to be a blessing and a curse, being in that kind of going through those years, being a friend of Bubba, to having the divine reality state be the only thing, as he said, standing firm. But your Leela, talk about familiarity, which I don't want to get into. I want to stay with the gifts. But your Leela about your watch and or even the demand where you stormed in during your anniversary saying, I have a demand, and he said, a what? What do you have?
You talk about losing face.
but one thing that you bring into the can be a dry, dharmic kind of thing. You bring his humor, his divine humor, and most especially in many of the stories, which I think even non-devotees can feel the love and the freedom that Adida have. And so if anybody were just to pick up one or two stories, I would definitely want them to look at the one about your watch and and the one about you demanding. You had a demand to break the conditions and have a party.
Yeah, exactly. And there's so many of the Leos. That's why stories here. Maybe I'm telling more of the dharmic aspects of the stories in this conversation, but the stories, they carry the humor, they carry the freedom of feeling, they carry the development from an ordinary person to becoming interested in who is this guy and why am I attracted to him and what do I feel when I'm in his company and why do I want to be there more, and then becoming a student of studying his teaching and becoming a disciple and becoming a devotee. That's all part of all the stories that show that development. And once I became more recognizing of his state in a devotee form, then he started revealing much more of who he is, because I could accept it more. But before that, it's like, I'm testing him. I love him. I'm also, I don't recognize him enough, so I'm not just totally submitted. He said, ultimately he said, you can't surrender. You're not going to surrender, but you can turn to what's attractive. That turning will attract you more and allow you to open up. Eventually, surrender will happen as a result. So that's all he was trying to do through his freedom and his happiness and his humor. His humor is crazy. He's the funniest person you could ever meet. Because he sees the humor of everything. There's a natural humor in things.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, you also revealed the demands of, taking on the discipline and doing the practices. And there was a Leela in here about how many people are misinterpreting, at least self-evaluating their practice. And the Leela that I think is very, very important is called hearing. In 1994, which I was fortunate enough to have a video of that, and I looked at it as I was reading the Leela. And one of the things that you do so well is that you don't embellish. See, a lot of the books that people write about their guru, they embellish. They kind of want to really have they have another agenda. They want to just say how great that person is or how wonderful it is. But when I just, for this one instance, read the hearing Leela, which is really worth the price of the book in my sense, and then look at the video of the actual occasion, I can see that you were true to form. You were true to word for word in what actually went on. So for the people who are skeptical about, you embellishing and telling, more fantastic stories than actually occurred, I just want to say that you seem to be very, very authentic in your telling the Leelas. Yeah,
it had to be true. I just tried to write down what happened. And here I am, an ego, a person that's been responding to this great being, growing in that response. And I got my qualities and my limitations and all that. And that has to be said because, it's part of the truth of the process. Yeah? And thinking that I was hearing at some point, which is a profound stage in practice, and he showed me, oh, bullshit, you're not. But he didn't say bullshit, He explained what hearing is and where I was at, where I thought I was hearing, and what the limitations of that were. Just to keep growing the understanding, to growing the recognition.
Yeah, but you've been blessed so much to have so much personal instruction from the divine Mahasiddha, if you will. It's truly remarkable the blessing that you've had in real personal terms, where some people could feel and you address this in the book of, I wish I were there. I wish I had been in his company. I wish I was there at the party. I wish I was in India with him. I wish. Could you speak to a little bit about that?
Yeah, because that's what a lot of people do say that when, they hear stories of the old days and so forth. But, yes, they're right. They miss something. It's really true. But it's missed at the human level. Mm-hmm. At the spiritual level, the transmission that he gave then, coming through his person, right, is the same transmission that's given right now in his eternal state. Because he has passed now. He's a divine Mahasamadhi in 2008. But devotees, those that are recognizing him, that are responding to him, feel his transmission as much now as when he's fully alive. So that transmission is what awakens the heart, what opens the draws, the attractiveness of the being to the freedom of non-separate state. Right? In the face of all the limitations that we stand as, right? So, I want to make a point about all the limitations of all we stand as, that we're completely deluded, and we really feel that we want to do the best we can with what we have and try to improve it and all that. But the only way to be free is to be attracted to freedom, not attracted to some sort of happy state, some experiential state.
And I guess to finish up this interview, which is really what points to this sixth gift, which is this fullness, as you point out, the fullness of his eternal presence, because that's really what he was always pulling or drawing or working to.
Because when he says he isn't changed at all, that means he, as consciousness, awakened to the absolute divine reality of existence, has never changed. He plays with the body to communicate and to work with those in front of him and to draw them to him. But his state has never changed. His state is that free state, as it is now, as it eternally will be, because it is the condition of existence itself. Right. That's the God state. Right. And that, of course, you see, you hear these dharmic things, you hear all sorts of spiritual teachers and gurus and adepts and all that will talk the teaching, but you got to read the book, because the stories carry something much more than just these words that I'm giving. Right. Because they have his feeling transmission coming to them, and that feeling transmission is an attraction that the heart recognizes. He always said, when the heart hears and feels the truth, it knows it. And the heart is the feeling place of the being. Right. And when the heart knows that truth, it wants to find out more. So the book is just an invitation. It's just an introduction. If you feel something in the book, if you like what you feel, find out direct words from Adida in his writings, and let him communicate directly to you. Right now, I'm kind of a vehicle or an agent of passing on some gifts and trying to show people something of who he is. But you really got to investigate it more. It's just an introduction.
Well, I want to thank you for the time and the leelas that you've been talking about here, and I hope that when we do put this on the Beezone, to invite people to read further your book, At the Feet of the Spiritual Master, Stories from My Life with Avatar Ardida Samraj by Gerald Sheinfeld, that, the audio portion of this interview will invite people to further get the book. And also, I can tell you from talking with you that your relationship to Ardida comes through when I'm talking with you. So I want to first thank you very much for your time and the work that you put into creating this book.
But you know how it is. You can't take credit for receiving a gift. Yes, I put it together, and yes, I did that. But the important thing is the gift, and that's what I try to pass on, the gift. So for example, next week I start a world tour. I'm going to travel all over the world and tell these leelas out of the book to public events and devotee events actually all over the world. And so it's going to be listed in my Facebook page, which is Facebook at www.facebook.com/G Sheinfeld. So maybe some people that hear this or that read the book would like to come to a presentation where they can meet me and hear some of these stories told live.
Well, I think that I think people will not only listen to this but also visit that webpage. And I think there was a little blip in the recording when you said that Facebook page. Could you say that again?
Yeah, it's www.facebook.com/G as in Gerald, G Sheinfeld, Sheinfeld. That takes you to the Facebook page. There's also a website that'll show a lot about the book and a lot about all sorts of stuff, including the tour, and that's at Stories of the Spiritual Master.
And your tour begins when?
I'm leaving on October 3rd to go to the East Coast. I think the first event is on October 9th. And after the East Coast for 2.5 months, it comes to the West Coast for 2.5 or 3 months or 2 months. And then it goes to all of Europe, and then Australia, New Zealand, and Fiji. It should be about a year.
So if people want to find the schedule and when you might be in their area, they can go to the webpage that Jerry mentioned, facebook.com/G Sheinfeld, and find out when he will be in your area. So again, I want to thank you very much for your time and the gift to everyone, and I hope you get a good response from people.
Thank you, Ed. I appreciate the opportunity to have spoken with you about this. I hope people have a chance to get to know Adidar in any way they can.
Okay. Well, thank you again, Jerry, and we'll talk again soon.
All right. Bye-bye.
All right.
All right. Bye-bye.
All right.